I like to encourage a little anarchy. So at any point that you guys have questions, or if you disagree with me, you want to jump in, feel free to do that. I like it as interactive as it can be. I thought I would start, I looked at the objectives, so I thought I'd cover those real fast so you get those covered. But I wanted to talk a little bit about chronic combat readiness. I do some work with the Marines, and one of the things we look at is post-traumatic stress, which I don't call post-traumatic stress disorder, because I think it's a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. So I just call it post-traumatic stress. But what we talk about is what happens to people who go into combat. When they go into combat, and they also have trauma in their childhoods that they develop in combat, chronic combat readiness. But if they already have it, it exacerbates whatever's going on once they get into combat. Bruce Perry is the first person I read who talked about chronic combat readiness. Are any of you familiar with Bruce Perry? Yeah, he's really good. I like him. He's a good speaker too. But he has a website called Child Trauma Academy. And for those of you who work with children, it's a great website to look at. And he talks a lot about neurological development of the brain and what happens to children who live in chronic stress. And that includes domestic violence, but it also includes growing up in a substance abusive family. So any situation that is psychologically, does not have to be physically abusive, but psychologically, emotionally stressful, becomes a situation where kids are flooded with stress hormones, and they develop a way of looking at the world very often, which is where they will see stress or danger in a situation where most of us don't see it. So when I work with folks, I am generally working with folks who have grown up in violent families. Almost everybody I've worked with grew up in a family where they either observed domestic violence, they may have observed domestic violence and substance abuse, they have experienced it directly, or they have lived in a family, because the new terminology is children exposed. So I want to start by telling you a story about one of the men who came into our program. And he was a man who was born in prison because his mother was a member of the mafia in New Jersey. That's the real mafia from my perspective. I'm from New Jersey, and you have to grab onto some state pride. And we have a so he was born in prison. His mother was a member of the mafia. He was taken away from her at birth. He was given a family who didn't really want to handle him. They put him in an orphanage where he was routinely beaten by the priests. In fact, one of the priests said to him, he said to the priest, "When I grow up, I'm going to come back and I'm going to kill you." And he actually did go back to kill this priest. And he said the priest was lucky because he was already dead. But he was one of those guys, which I see when you work with gang folks or people who have criminal lives, that had all the skills and the personality traits that make it really possible for them to do really well if they go straight. And so he had good leadership skills, and he wound up becoming a multi-millionaire businessman. So when he came into our program, he didn't come in because he thought beating up women was a bad thing. He came in because in a business deal, he stuck a gun in a guy's mouth, and the gun had a hair trigger. And he doesn't know exactly why he pulled the gun out of the guy's mouth, but he did. And shot himself in the foot. And he was so angry, he didn't know he shot himself in the foot. And he met a guy for lunch, a pal, and the guy said, "Hey man, there's blood coming out of your shoe." And he said, "Oh, I think I must have shot myself in the foot." And the guy said to him, "I think you have an anger management problem." Which I thought was kind of a cute little euphemism for violence. But anyway, by the way, it is the euphemism right now, is anger management. Send people to anger management, because it's easy to say, "I got an anger problem." It's not so easy to say, "I have a violence problem." So he came into group, and we learned some things about him initially that were very important. One is that he had a hair-trigger temper. And anybody who talked about hurting children was somebody he went after. In fact, the second night in group, he got up and started to go after somebody on the other side of the room, which generally doesn't happen. And I got up and stood between them, and I said, "Don't make me embarrass you in front of everyone." And so he likes me now. But he was somebody who would escalate very quickly and then de-escalate pretty quickly, unless it was something major, he can hold a grudge. But generally, he went up fast and he'd come down relatively quickly. The other thing was that his word was golden to him. And I think whenever we're doing the work that we're doing, that part of what we need to find out is what has meaning for the people we work with. And that for him, his word had meaning to him. But everybody has something that has meaning for them. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? That we have to get to. So anyway, he was in group probably about 3 or 4 months. And he came in one night and he was furious. And he said, "This guy owes me a bunch of money. He hasn't paid me. And I'm going to blow his effing kneecaps off." And I said, "Well, you can't do that." He said, "I'm not doing it. I'm hiring somebody." So we have low standards for success in my program. We thought it was great if he wasn't actually doing it himself. So we spent a lot of time with him. We do 2-hour groups once a week. And probation, in Orange County, probation is very rigid with domestic violence programs. But probation monitors these programs, and they want everybody to talk every week. And you all know when you do groups with substance abuse, not everybody gets to talk every time. Because sometimes somebody's problems are bigger issues than somebody else's. And so we spent a lot of time with him that night because he was lethal. We knew he had a history of homicide. He didn't admit to it, but we knew it. We spent a lot of time with him. And everybody in that room learned something that they needed in an intimate relationship. They learned to listen, which is important. They learned that they are in a room with somebody whose rage and anger are huge, and that they not only didn't create it, but they have no control over it. They have no way of stopping it. They learn that if they're going to intervene with him at all, they better take their time. And they better think about what it is they're going to say. And they learn that somebody else's problems might be bigger than theirs. So they learn a lot in that room listening to him. Now, is anybody wondering about duty to warn here? Do we have a duty to warn? Yeah. We don't. And the reason we don't is because we don't know the intended victim. He's not going to tell us who it is. So what we have to do is create a safety plan because we have no knowledge and you can't make a report if you don't know the intended victim. Generally speaking, in domestic violence and with substance abuse in families, you get an idea of who the intended victim might be. But in this situation, when you've got somebody who's also not only domestically violent, but generally violent, you don't know. So we spent the evening doing a safety plan with him. And this was our safety plan. We got him to agree to it. We got him to agree that if he escalated during the week, if he started to escalate, he would call either Bill or myself. We were the co-facilitators of the group. We got him to promise he would do nothing, and give his word he would do nothing violent to this guy from this week to the next. And we got 3 guys in group to volunteer to talk to him during the week, just to check out with him how things were going. So he came back the next week and he said, "I took care of it." I said, "What'd you do?" He said, "I just called the guy. I said, 'Hey man, I'm in one of those violence groups. It's about all I can do to hang on to myself.'" He said the guy was over in 15 minutes, paid him everything he owed him. And I said, "Nice use of group." But this is where he started. And the reason I tell this story is because he stays in the program because he knows he needs to. When you talk about a recovery process, when you're dealing with somebody who's got a kind of level of violence in that history throughout their childhood, it's like drug and alcohol. It's learning a second language emotionally. You have to be there to do that. You have to be there for one time. So he started out with things like he didn't know what love was. What's love? I don't know what you're talking about. You guys all talk about having parents who could tuck you in at night. I never had anybody tuck me in at night. You might have got beaten up by your parents. You might have had your parents beat you up, but I never even had a good moment with somebody. I didn't have anybody read me a story at night. So what are you talking about? I said, well, do you know anybody who loves anybody? He said he had some friends. I said, watch them. Do what they do, as they say in AA, act as if, you know. And we had role-playing in group. We do anything that we can, that seems to work. We're willing to try anything in group. We had a guy in group who loved to role-play, and he role-played everybody's wife or girlfriend. So he was totally into role-playing. So I never really questioned it until now. But you know, I would get to play the woman sometimes, but he got to role-play a lot. And we did that with him. We role-played interactions with him. We used Virginia's family sculpting, so you could sort of create this family. We looked at alternate ways of seeing things, because when you're dealing with people who are abusive in families, and when you're dealing with substance abusive folks, don't you see that their perceptions are a little off? That how they see things are kind of different than how... So you're having to work on perception. How do you see it? What do you see it? Is there another way of looking at it? And so we did all kinds of stuff with him. But I think one of the most important things that we did, which is what 12-step programs did, was to create community. Create community where there wasn't any. Break the isolation of the people. Not only the victims, which we did in the 70s, right? Where the victims were so isolated, and still are isolated quite frequently. But the perpetrators are isolated too. People who are violent, people who are abusive in any way, are isolated in their own minds. They have to create their own story, right? And so we worked with him a lot. We worked with him through one of the men in our program who had gone to prison for breaking his wife's neck. He was in prison for 2 years. And we wrote to him while he was in prison. He came back and he joined group again. And he'd been in group about 5 years, and he had cancer of his tongue, his throat, and his larynx, which was pretty metaphorical because he had been so verbally abusive as well. But he was a great guy. He was a guy that became that transformational change we like to see in people. And he became a speaker, and he would go out. He was 7 feet tall. He was a huge presence of a man. And he would go out and he would speak to kids, and he would speak to other adults about abuse. And when he got cancer, they had to cut out 2/3 of his tongue. And they told him he would never speak again. And they built him a new tongue out of the skin on his arm. And he learned to speak again. And he ended his life speaking, and he came to group every week. And at the end of his life, we had men volunteering in group to do round-the-clock hospice for him. We were there with him when he was dying. And I think that part of what you see is the development of family for people who haven't ever had it. And I think that was maybe the best gift of all to this guy from the mafia. Because in effect, you're rewiring somebody's brain. You know, and they have to practice over and over and over again, which is why, although in California we have 52 weeks required if someone is convicted of domestic violence or convicted of a lesser crime, but it involves an intimate, they're still supposed to go for 52 weeks of treatment. It's why 52 weeks isn't enough. And you guys all know that who are working in substance abuse, right? First 52 weeks, what does somebody learn? They try not to do the bad thing, right? But they don't recover in 52 weeks. And so what we hope is that people will stay in group so that they really have the opportunity to recover. And this particular man has stayed in group for 15 years. We have West LA, a third of our group has been there over 4 years. We have people that stay or people that come back for tune-ups. The door is always open for them. And so he learned a lot, and he came into group one night, and he said, I'm sort of proud of myself, and I want to talk about it. He said, what's happened? He said, my girlfriend had a stroke. He said, I'm bathing her, and I'm feeding her, and I'm caring for her, and I never knew I could be that kind of woman. And, you know, what I think for any of us who do this work, what we want to see is for people to have that opportunity, to have the opportunity to become somebody they look in the mirror and they see, and they really like that person. That's a cool person. Because nobody takes responsibility for what they've done unless they feel good enough about themselves to do it. Denial serves a real purpose. I think it's called survival, right? So I want to talk to you a little bit. I sort of want to know what you're interested in hearing. I was going to tell you some of the things we do that I thought might be practical and helpful for you, but I don't know if that's where you want to go. So, you know, I'll start talking, and if you want to go in a different direction, just tell me where you want to go. Unless it's like out, because, yeah.
I think one of the things I wanted to hear about is, I guess, just the different facets of domestic violence, because I know we often relate it to women, but it happens with the children, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to hear more about that and how to help that.
Well, the range of domestic violence. Well, I think a lot of what you see, you know, I look at, first of all, a range of aggression in this country. That what we tend to do is label any act of physical aggression domestic violence. And I don't think that's correct, right? I think there is aggression that can happen in otherwise healthy families, depending on the stress level and what happens. So I think I have it over here. I have a continuum of aggression and abuse that looks at common couple aggression, looks at high conflict, or I know.
I just really went
Thank you though. That's and actually I've updated it, Charlotte.
Love it.
Yeah.
That's great.
And what I did was break domestic violence into 3 areas.
Okay.
Okay, and one area is abuse, one area is battering, one area is terrorism. And let me ask you, when you think of domestic violence perpetrator, what do you think of?
Drunk white man with a pickup truck.
I will not lose that visual.
There you go, Jay.
Okay, and I'm going to tell the guys in group that one tonight too. All the other guys that are, you know, drunk and not so white. We're not even drunk. Because one of the things you see with domestic violence is like a 40 to 60% range in terms of substance abuse. There's, you know, some do, some don't. And when they do the research, and this is why I think it's important, clinical people, we don't read research much. How many of you guys like to read research?
Too many numbers.
Yeah, but most people don't like to read it, and if they read it, they read the discussion section. Right. And if you read the discussion section, you miss big stuff. Like, I had to read it to write because my co-author's a researcher, so she made me read it. And I had to read it to write it in forms that people would want to read. And one of the things I realized was if you only read the discussion section, you lose how long did this research go on, who were the subjects of this research. For instance, I read the discussion sections to see if it was interesting enough to even read it. And I read this one, and it had a 1.5-year follow-up, and it had some good results, and I thought, this is terrific. When I looked at how many people were studied, it was one white couple in the Midwest. That was the entire research population. So, I mean, research is dangerous to me because for clinical people, it creates the policies we have to deal with. It's really important. It creates the policies that are so unrelated often to the actual work we do. So I look at, you know, oftentimes when people have a visual of a battery, okay, it's the guy in J-Lo's Sleeping with the Enemy.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Or Julia Roberts, J-Lo's Enough, The Burning Bed. You don't generally see that kind of guy. I have yet to meet a one-dimensional guy. You know, I mean, if they were one-dimensional, nobody'd hang with them anyway. They wouldn't have partners. So in that regard, it makes people, and there are women who are violent, but we tend to see far fewer in numbers who are on the far end of the scale, like battering. I don't like to use the word batterer. It's become a short form. A lot of the people we work with, I mean, I don't like the labels so much, but in Calgary, when I was up there, they were saying people who use aggression. It's a long form, but I like it better, as opposed to, you know, it's hard for people to come in a group if they're labeled a batterer. I mean, you guys have it a lot better than we do, because you've got 30 years on us or more, where it's cool to be in a 12-step program now, right? I mean, I was speaking at a Girl Scout anniversary on a community panel, and I was talking to the other 3 panelists, and one of them said, you know, as soon as I get out of here, I have to go to my AA meeting, my regular meeting. And somebody else said, oh, you're in AA? Well, I'm in Al-Anon and ACA. And the other person said, oh my gosh, you are? Well, I'm in OA. What are you in, Alice? I said, Weight Watchers. Oh, I really just wanted to be an A. It was like so cool to be in this group. And so we're not there in domestic violence. Nobody's like real, hey, I'm in that barriers intervention program. Nobody's there yet. So you look at this range of who's doing what. And I think the best we can do is look at the context for who we're dealing with and what's happening to deal with that. For instance, when I was working with one woman who was abusive to her children, and I looked at her life, I thought, my God, no wonder she's abusive to her children. So you had to look at doing the mental health work with her, but respite care. She needed respite care. So I always think, I'm not going to look at just what's intra-psychically going on in somebody, what's coming at them from the outside that they really have to deal with that we need to address before we start dealing with clinical issues. Very, you know, she lived in a very small space with 3 little boys under the age of 6 who were wild Indians. She knew nothing about setting boundaries. She knew nothing, her own childhood was incredibly abusive. So there was all kinds of support she needed besides just, you know. So that when I look at abuse, I try to look at this big picture of what's going on for people. And then I think there's some people we don't know how to help. But most of them are either in jail or they're not going to show up for your program and stay very long. So most of the folks we look at and work with, if you look at the continuum, are either in abuse or battery and non-materials. We've worked with people with long rap sheets, so they're antisocial, right? But are they psychopaths? I don't think so. You know, I think there are psychopaths, but I don't think they're either so good we don't know they're there. But most of them aren't. I think most of them we don't know how to get to. We had a guy in group who was in group, for instance, for three different times. He came to group. The first 2, he came because his girlfriend wanted to come. And I thought he was a psychopath. And I'm not into labeling people, but I just got the weirdest vibe from him. The 3rd time he came in, I actually connected with him, and we actually made headway, and we had a breakthrough and all this stuff. And I said to him after group, what was the difference this time from the other 2 times? He said, the other 2 times I didn't care. You know? So it was real interesting for me if I'd been quick to label, you know, and I didn't come up as a therapist. I came up as a grassroots activist, and so I didn't have any training in counseling. I had to learn by the seat of my pants with the first guy that walked through the door. I had 6 hours of prep before I went. But unfortunately, I am from New Jersey and I have adolescent omnipotence. So I thought, you know, I can do this, you know. So it was sort of, you know, an ignorance is bliss kind of situation. But you know, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
You are.
Okay, oh, good, good. But I'm trying to, because it's such a big question, and I really get it. I mean, I think most people who grow up in really wonderful families don't wind up being abusive. They don't have the role model for it. When I do interviews with people, I ask them in an intake, do you like your mother? Do you like your father? They go, oh, I love my family. I said, I didn't ask you if you love them. Do you like them? Do you respect them? You start there, you get a ton of information about what somebody's come up with. It's like going in to a recovery program. I used to go into recovery programs and talk about domestic violence. It's too much for people who are in recovery, in residential recovery. So I talk to them about anger, and then they talk to me about domestic violence. You know, so it's sort of like you get a ton of information about that. You get a ton of information if people have siblings and you find out the relationship. Because sometimes, for instance, like several of the men, well, more than several of my groups, have said that they were forced to fight with their brothers, and that if whoever lost got beaten up by their dad, you know, or they got put out on the playground and taught to fight with somebody. If they didn't win, they got beaten up. So it creates a lot of animosity between the siblings. You want to get this picture of this, who they came up with, but not only that, when you're dealing with kids, personality makes a huge difference. Some people are much more resilient than others. The age at which somebody's abused, there are things that happen to little children that they don't recover from, but if they happened when they were teenagers, they would have a much better chance. So you look at the age, you look at the meaning that's the person attributes to what's happened to them, and you also look at community resources and family resources. So some people don't have a mom or dad they can count on, but they sure as heck have a grandma, grandpa, they have an aunt, an uncle, they have a teacher, they have a scout leader, they have somebody in their church. So I try to do an assessment where I look more holistically at people to find out, you know, what's actually going on for them. And there's a connection. I mean, certainly we would consider every child who grows up in an abusive family to be abused in one way or the other, because they've witnessed it or heard it or had the experience of living in detention. And most kids hear far more than their parents think they've heard. Mm-hmm. They're hiding in their rooms. They hear it. You know, some kids scream into coffee cans because they can't scream out loud, they won't be heard. And they learn to protect the parent that is more vulnerable. So oftentimes it's the abusive parent. They also learn to blame, and I see them far more often blaming their mothers. And I look at that gender issue because I think we tend to expect a lot more from mothers. We're starting to expect more from fathers than we did. But for years, I mean, the whole premise of family therapy is built on the mother's relationship with the children, not looking at the importance or significance of fathers. So, you know, there's a lot to answer your question.
Yeah.
Okay, does somebody else have their hand up?
Thank you.
Oh, okay, sure.
So I'm a pre-doc here, and the university that I'm from has an IPD program that I would do assessments for, and one of the things that I was always surprised by is the range of families that it hit, because it wasn't all, I mean, regardless of socioeconomic, regardless of race, anything, domestic violence could be an issue for. And one of the things I noticed was a lot of the women bringing their kids in would say, you know, it wasn't just all of a sudden, it kind of happened gradually, and then the next thing I knew, I was in an abusive relationship and had been married for 15 years, and now what? What would be your advice as far as preventative measures and like small red flags that you can pick up before it turns into a full-blown abusive relationship?
When I'm doing counseling with people, one of the things I ask them, and they're dating, I ask them, if you're in a dating relationship for 3 months, and the person you're dating comes to your house, and your checkbook, if you have checkbooks, I still have it, is laying out on the table, and you happen to have, let's all fantasize, $5,000 in your checkbook. and you have left the room and you come back in, and the person looks at you and says, you know, I hate to ask you this, I feel really close to you, but I'm really short right now, and I'm gonna ask you if I can borrow $3,000. Could you loan me $3,000? I'll pay you back, I'll get the money in a couple of weeks. What would you say?
Well, I'm poor, so I'd say nope.
But by that time, you probably would have already been sexual with this person and incredibly vulnerable emotionally. Now, I'm not an abstinence person, do not get me wrong on that, I'm not at all. But I think that one of the things we do is give ourselves to people and we don't know who we're giving ourselves to. And when we do that, we become vulnerable to them real fast. So we don't take the time to figure out who we're with. But when my kids asked me, what I said to them was, ask the person if they like their mom or dad, find out their relationship with their family. If they don't have a good relationship with their family, what have they done to mediate it? Have they gone to therapy? Have they gone to a 12-step program? Do they have another family member? You know, look at their long-term relationships. Do they have friends? And then at least see them get angry a couple times. Because you want to know what they do. Now, there are lots of people who will get real angry and they know it's inappropriate, so they'll go home. And they'll do it at home and you'll have no idea what they've done. But pay attention. I mean, there are yellow flags and red flags. I mean, for me, I always remember one of my clients saying, you know, she had come out of an abusive relationship and she met somebody in the health food store, so immediately they had a bond. Right? Who doesn't bond over granola? So they had this bond, and they're talking about health food, and they're talking about all this stuff, right? And so he asked her out, and she gives him her phone number, and they make a date, and he doesn't show up. And she calls him, and she tells him that if he's not going to show up, that he should call her. Does anybody see a problem here?
Yeah.
I said, it's called common courtesy because everybody knows that. You should know that you call somebody if you're not going to show up. So it, you know, it's working with people on their boundaries. It's you knowing your boundaries, because most of us, right, we create our boundaries when we're about 12 or 13, right? Infidelity, right? Giant boundary. You know, teenage girls, teenage boys, I'll do this to somebody who, you know, we have dead bodies laying all over the street, according to two of my favorite sources of research, which are Cosmopolitan and Ripple. They, you know, lots of people have been unfaithful, right? But do we do what we said we were going to do? I mean, people stay in relationships with people. They work it out. We change because we create our boundaries when we don't have life experience to create our boundaries. So now it's about, what are your boundaries? I mean, and I'm not just talking about obvious ones. I'm talking about what you say to somebody in an argument. If somebody calls me a bunch of, I have never been called names till the Jodi Arias murder trial. I was never called names, and now I got called every single name in the book by people I didn't know. Because they felt like they could. They could do it anonymously, or they could do it, you know, on the phone. But nobody in my life has ever called me those names, and I didn't try it. I didn't grow up with it. I wouldn't, you know, I mean, one of my goals in my group was to create a family. I didn't have a big therapeutic background, but what I had was a family who loved each other. And so we could create that in this room, you know, and that's what I continue to try to do. The men get to make decisions about what happens. We just had somebody who was doing a really wonderful project to find out with the men what was their teachable moment. What was the moment for them where they felt success, what happened to them, to really live the success over again, which people don't usually do. I thought it was a wonderful program, so I asked the men in group if they would be okay having him come in and do this group. And they get to decide whether that happens or not. And then in West LA, they said, well, Alyce, if you're not doing the group, should we have to pay for it? And I thought, God, that's a bummer. But they shouldn't. I'm not doing it. I had to be there the whole time, but No, so they don't have to pay for group that night. But I mean, I want them to feel like they have a voice in that room and that their voice matters. And that, so I mean, there are a lot of things to look at when
It
you're
seems
looking.
mostly like attachment styles in their early family years. It's really a big indicator.
Attachment's big. I mean, I would say the two issues we run into the most are PTS delayed, you know, where you don't see people in that powerless situation, again, until they get in an intimate relationship. And the other one is attachment, you know, and learning to attach and learning who you can trust and who you can't. I mean, there are a lot of exercises we do around that and around empathy, do a lot of work around empathy, do a lot of work around choice, the power of choice, that we redefine power as not this kind of controlling thing, but the power of being able to choose. We do a lot of stuff with prevention, preventative thinking. I used to think, just as an example, did I answer the question? Okay, anybody else before I? Well, in terms of prevention, I just want to tell you a little, we use Aikido as a metaphor in prevention because Aikido is a martial art of reconciliation. And in this country, I think a lot of times we think of martial arts as a way to kick somebody's butt, but it's really a way not to. And so in Aikido, there are three basic premises. And I think they're great with substance abuse, by the way, as well. The first one is, don't put yourself in a situation. So you use halt, right? Don't get too hungry, too angry, too lonely, too tired. Don't put yourself in a situation. Know yourself, know your internal state, but pay attention to the person you have to interact with. Like if you're coming home from group at 9 o'clock at night and your partner's had a hard day with the kids, or a hard day at work or whatever, this is not a good time to talk. It's not. So we do some very practical things. The second thing in Aikido is if you find yourself in a difficult situation, think your way out of it. Now, once again, the thinking your way out of it, we work in group on problem solving. What we find are the two things that tend to de-escalate rage and anger are empathy and empowerment. So working with people on their ability to empathize, working with people on their empowerment becomes very important. So, and the third thing is that physical or emotional aggression is a last resort. If you can get people doing that, you've already usually prevented things. Because one of the things with chronic combat readiness is that you're in chronic self-defense. So we have to redefine self-defense for people. You know, I mean, that becomes very important. That when you're in an argument, you get escalated, right? You're even in a regular argument with a partner, your adrenaline's going up, your stress hormones, you get sort of triggered into fight versus flight. Well, if you act at that moment, you're going to overreact because you're in a self-defense mode. So we do some very cognitive behavioral kinds of things with that. But just in terms of prevention or preventative thinking, I just tell this story about a black belt in Aikido from this country who goes to Japan. And when he goes to Japan, he's getting on Shinkansen, the speed train. And as he gets on, there's a man who is drunk and disheveled, and he's getting violent with people. And he pushes this woman with a child. And the black belt from this country gets ready to take him out. And before he can do that, an elderly man goes to this man and he says, what do you have in your lunchbox? Kind of stops the guy. And he says, persimmons, soup. And the elderly man said, oh, really? He said, I grow persimmons. What kind of persimmons do you have? So, he stops him again. And then he says, what kind of soup do you have? And the man tells him, and he said, you must have a wife who loves you a lot to spend the time to make that soup for you. And the man begins to cry. And he said, I had a wife who loved me until 3 weeks ago, and my wife died. And the martial arts black belt from this country said, I learned the true meaning of Aikido. It's about getting to the heart. It's about getting through the violence and aggression and getting to the heart of what's going on. And so when he left the train, this man was lying on the other guy's lap, and the elderly man was comforting him. So we try to bring that into the program. How do you think about going into a situation if you know it's going to be problematic? So we start looking at choice. And one of the things that we use as sort of an example are hot buttons that any of us may have. We all have hot buttons, things that sort of piss you off. It sort of doesn't matter. You just feel like, if that happens, I'm going to get pissed off. I feel that way at the Republican convention, but I know I should come home, so I'm not going to. But anyway, so there are things that just for most of us are going to aggravate the heck out of us. And one of them in California tends to be rush hour traffic on Fridays. Right? Maybe caught in rush hour.
I think it's named wrong.
You what?
It's named wrong.
What should it be named?
I don't know, but it sure ain't no rush.
Well, that's true, huh? So I said to people, I used to believe people were hired to aggravate me on the freeway because they would not let you in, they would tailgate you, they would cut you off. And then I drove on the Autobahn in Germany, or in Austria. Have any of you driven on the Autobahn? Right? You can drive as fast as you want, right? As long as, just depending on your engine size. But I love it because it's in kilometers, and it'll say like 120. And like, I'm up there. I really love that. Feeling like I'm going 120 miles an hour when I'm not. But what I noticed was that people would tailgate. But they don't give you the courtesy 10, 20, 30 feet they give you in California. They're literally on your tail. But if you live in California, you know how to handle this. Yes, slam on your brakes, let them rear-end you, and then sue them for their chalet. So you have a summer home in another country. But nobody's doing that, right? Nobody's doing that. And people are pulling over and letting people pass because the meaning for them is different. For us, it's an assault on our humanity that somebody tailgates us or whatever, right? For them, the meaning is different. There's also a law that they're going to be fined, a huge fine if they don't pull over. But they could still do this or flip somebody off, and they're not doing any of that. And we see people doing that all the time on our freeways. So I came back to California and I thought, man, I'm going to drive like this because this is just cool. I'm just going to be zen behind the wheel. So my first day back, I got to practice, and a man pulled out in front of me, and I slammed on the brake, and I had a fishtail to avoid hitting him. And I thought, what do I want to have happen? Because that's the way I want my clients to think. What do I want to have happen? What's the best way to get there? So I thought, well, if I, flip him off or do this, besides ruining my reputation as working on anger management, it's going to be, it's going to escalate things, and then we're going to lose the point. And what's the point? Is pay attention. So I just went like this. He said, thank you. He said something with you on the end of it anyway. And then he drove off, and I drove off, and I thought, you don't have to change the whole picture. You just need to adjust the frame a little bit. So we started talking about what are preventative strategies when you get yourself in a difficult situation. And one of the predictable ones is getting stuck on our freeways. So what do you do? What do you guys do when you know you're going to get stuck? What do you do? Listen to an audiobook.
Sunflower seeds.
What else?
I started blessing the idiot that's cut me off for going too slow. I really do. I
That's
just say
cool.
God bless you, because maybe they have something, or maybe they're just an idiot, whatever it is. But I really, instead of flipping him off and cursing him, which is my first reaction, I just say bless you or God bless you, sometimes 20 times before it gets into my head. But it's helpful. I drive a lot. I was in LA yesterday. It took me 4 hours to get back. So.
Or if they're driving like a maniac, you just say, oh, they must have diarrhea. They're eager to
I
get
just turn up the
home.
music or
They know that.
audiobook. There's a lot of tools.
One of the guys in my group is now telling I said to him, just think, maybe their water just broke.
Yeah.
So, and truly, or they have
And it's a
diarrhea.
guy, right?
Yeah, no, that's what he's doing now. He's generalized it to men. So if a man cuts him off, you can tell maybe he's water.
That's very scary, so that's.
Yeah.
He should be good though.
Well, the question is, how many times have you cut somebody else off?
There's a good one. So you empathize. You're going, I think I cut people off, but not on purpose. But I remember one time when I got a call, and I'd been doing a 6-hour training, and I realized the call had come in 3 hours before, that my partner was in the hospital, and had been rushed to the hospital. I drove crazy until I realized I was doing it. I was so upset, and then I realized I was doing it. So I try to do that too. The other thing I do is I have an auto aerobics book. Do any of you know have any of you ever done auto aerobics? Try this. On your way out of here, grab your steering wheel and push. Hold. I can do this for a long time. Relax. Do this about 15 times and you're totally buffed by the time you get home. Your arms aren't flopping around as much, your neck's a little firmer, and your chest is kind of perky. If you have cruise control, you can do the little leg lift guys. You know, leg lift, you can do thigh master guys. If you have a sunroof, you do this right out of the top. People think you're waving at them. You've got friends on the freeway. So, you know, there's a lot you can do to make things, to change the way you're perceiving it. So we make it very practical, but this is part of what happens. Now, how long do I have?
You have 17 minutes.
17. Terrific. I just needed to figure out what I was going to say next. Yes.
I was just thinking about overall, you know, that physical aggression or just getting upset. And my group today, I don't know if it was full moon last night, but they were just a little bit more, what's the right word to use? Crazy?
Energetic.
Yeah, and
Rowdy.
it's a big, it's a large group of guys. So next time I meet with them, we need to have a little talk. But I was just thinking about, you know, when they get to that and they start getting more of that aggression, that testosterone's coming out, what are some good techniques?
Okay, well, first of all, we do a thing called timeout. And aggression tends to be contagious in a room. It can be very contagious. So there are a number of things you can do. I mean, one of the things we work on is as I said, timeout, which is you can bring them back to where in your body are you feeling this, right? Where in your body do you feel this? And that's about learning your cues. So for some people, they'll tell you, I got a knot in my stomach, I get butterflies, my heart's beating faster, my shoulders are tight. You refocus the energy in the room, right? So you get them to focus on where they're feeling it, and then they tell you where they're feeling it. Now, the other thing is that once they know that, you could do something physical with them. You could do isometrics with them, but you could also focus on what they're thinking, because when we tend to get agitated, it's in intimate relationships and about intimate relationships, it's usually because we become history majors and we remember everything that person has done in the history of our relationship with them, and we're going right back up.
So like they're being triggered by something.
They're triggered by something. So you're looking at your triggers. Okay, what's happening? Why do you feel this way? And then we get people to practice talking to themselves. So one of the things you could do in the room is to say, what would help you right now to feel better? Think about, you're really working to refocus them on something else. Or you can do, you know, one of the exercises I do that's about empathy with the men is to think about a time in their lives where they felt powerless or afraid, prior to the age of 10. When you're dealing with people who are abusive in some way, I talk about prior to the age of 10, because oftentimes they don't relate to fear. If it's particularly males, they don't tend to relate to fear, but they can when they're children. So you can get them to relate to that differently, and to get with one other person and to talk about who they told, who they didn't tell, what they who's safe, who isn't. You're getting them to look at who's safe and who isn't. who they blamed. Now you can start talking about self-blame. I don't know an addict or someone who perpetrates abuse who doesn't have their fair share of self-blame. They just don't want to talk about it. The rage and anger they have in themselves, and why they have it, and why they've crossed, every time they cross their bottom lines, that they lose respect for themselves. I also have clips, like I just showed this clip from Louis C.K. hosting Saturday Night Live that was so terrific. And sometimes I will put in a clip, or I have these clips that I find that, like these young boys that are showing incredible empathy to these other kids. And so I'll use that to refocus them. There's a lot, usually there's one or two people that are more jacked up than others. And you can get those two. You get those two to calm down, everybody's calmed down.
Right.
We've had escalations in group. We don't have a lot of them, but we've had escalations. There have been, in the last 35 and a half years, there have been 2 times that I called the police, where there was nothing that we could do that de-escalated somebody until I said, I'm calling the police, so you have your choice. You can leave or stay. Because I don't mind if people get mad in group. That's good learning. You know, it's okay, what do I do with it? So that the timeout thing, we also give people the option of leaving group and coming back. Because if they're real escalated, they need to figure it out. They need to separate themselves from big emotion.
And that's what happened if he left.
He left.
Didn't come back.
He didn't come back?
No, like 3 or 4 people left.
Oh, 3 or 4 people left. And none of them came back?
Nope.
Well, that's a good thing to start group with next time, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you might focus it, you might want to focus it on something. You might want to give them a specific thing to deal with that looks at some kind of pain or triggers or something that's about why they left. Because we had, in domestic violence groups, sometimes if people leave and they don't come back, we have to do a duty to warn, because it depends on what they're escalating, right? So you really want to know that. We want them to come back. We want them to save their dignity, but we want them to come back. So we tell them, we do all kinds of things with people. You can take those 4 people and have them sculpt a family. They've got energy, all this big energy. What are you going to do with all this big energy? I know I was doing an anger management group for women in recovery at Flossie Lewis. And my anger management group was I put on Richard Simmons aerobicizing with the classes. And we all started, dancing, because that spends your energy, right? Because when you've got, when I do a full timeout, you get people to leave, but when they leave, and this is, maybe you want to do a full timeout with them, when they leave, what they're doing are several things. The first thing is a physical cool down that's not aggressive. So you get them to do something like walk, jog, ride a bike, pull those bands. I bet you guys have those bands here. That tires people out. Jump ropes where they can jump rope real fast. Anything that brings their physiological level down. Then we have them practice positive self-talk, which is, I want to solve this problem. I want to feel good about myself at the end of this. With folks we don't have people come to a domestic violence program because they think personal growth is far out and they can't wait to do it. They usually come in either because their partner has left or threatened to leave and they believe that's going to happen, or God speaks to them through the SWAT team and they have a religious experience. So they're coming in for those reasons. So when you've got folks that are, physically acting out, the ability to talk yourself down may start with something like, I don't want to lose my family, I don't want to get arrested, I don't want my kids to hate me, but it gets to what you want. The goal is to get to what you want to happen. So you're talking yourself down, but you're also directing yourself in a problem-solving kind of way. Then the third thing is, after you've physically calmed down and talk yourself down, then it's, why am I so upset? What's my perception? What is bothering me so much with this? What do I need to do differently? and then to come back and to try to solve the problem. When they come back to try to solve the problem in the group, you've got the ability to do that. You've got the ability to put that process together. And when in men's groups, a lot of times the men in general are not comfortable with process. They're comfortable with, give me a strategy to use. They love timeout because it's a strategy. To go through timeout is a process. So, and they're usually, we work with gay and straight men in the same group, and it's a cross-cultural group, but it's about being comfortable understanding somebody else's, what's going through for somebody else. They've got to learn process. So we had two guys, both of them have been in group over 5 years, and they got in an argument, and they're friends, a couple weeks ago. And somebody tried to stop it by saying, okay, now, you could do, and I said, well, wait a minute, let's let them do it. Because what they did was demonstrate for the group a timeout, a living, breathing timeout. And how you start out in a way that's intimidating, then everybody else gets to talk about how they felt. Because if these guys are calmed down, I don't want to wait and see their mood when they come back, but if these guys are calmed down and receptive, maybe there are other guys in the room who felt intimidated by what they were doing. You have people begin to talk about how they feel, which allows them to get, the feedback from the other people and maybe to develop empathy. The other thing to talk about is styles, because styles of anger really frighten people. If we tend to assess people as more dangerous if they do anger differently than we do. So if you're a more volatile personality, you tend to be more frightened by the quiet ones. And if you're a quiet personality, you tend to be more, frightened by the loud ones. And I usually say to people in group, how many of you guys, I'll say you, how many of you guys have ever felt like telling a client or a supervisor or a teacher or somebody to shut it? Okay. So it's like a human experience, right? How many of you routinely tell the people you feel like telling to shut it? How many of you routinely do that? Why not? What? Because they're what?
It wouldn't serve me.
It wouldn't serve you. Yeah, for what reasons would it serve you?
It would probably put the other person on the defense, and there'd be absolutely nothing going on between us that would be needing to save the relationship or whatever the problem's about. Both of us would be like this.
So you cut off communication. Okay, but the other thing that happens at work is that there are logical consequences immediately, usually, and there are witnesses. And we are all better with witnesses and logical consequences. We have a mechanism that works for us every place but home, usually. Or in the car when we think we're anonymous, when we're anonymous. So we turn off the switch. So what I say to people is, you already have skills about this. You can redirect them by telling them a story. You can redirect them by making them laugh about something. There's lots of ways to redirect them, but if they're in a good place to listen, it's good to get them to not only look at their perception, because once you make a problem tangible, there are ways to solve it. And then the group can work on empowerment together. And I find that works. It's very seldom I've had it not work.
I'm a batter's convention, and I've been doing anger management groups and parenting with courts and probation for a while. And what I've noticed, I do for each group in my other place, we do check-ins before every group, especially for the males too. So in check-in, how are you feeling right now? And I call it check yourself before you wreck yourself. So whenever they're going into their house with their kids and their wife, I tell them always check yourself before you wreck yourself. Like check in with yourself, how are you feeling right now before you enter even your home. Or you enter hanging out with people. So if you're irritated, and kind of do like decompression before you even see people.
That's
If
cool.
you need to take a nap, if you're hungry, if you need to take a shower, do that before you even hang out with anyone.
That's, I think that's great. And we do check-in, but it's less structured. Only because I tend to be less structured than Mike. But, yeah, but we do an informal check-in. But the other thing we started doing is because we wanted people to be able to ask for what they wanted, because that tends to be a big issue, is we would have them check if they want to be sure to talk that night. So that they would. So the check-in is really good. I don't know how many people you have in your group.
Anywhere from 18 to 26 right now.
Well, it's hard to do a group that's that big. It's very difficult. I think ideally, it's good not to have a group over 12 people. And do you have a co-facilitator?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is very difficult. I have 2 minutes. That is very difficult. That is very difficult. Once again, that is very difficult. I don't know what to say in 2 minutes. Okay, so I think that's a great idea, and I like your phrase too. Check it before.
Oh yeah, I love phrases.
Yeah,
Fun
that's a cool phrase. Yes.
I have a question. In regards to the physiological effect of anger, can we associate that with, or parallel it with a drug, or even surfacing the use of a drug? Anger being the drug?
Adrenaline being the drug that, or the stress hormones that are released. You know, you can do that. But I think sometimes we're pathologizing human behavior in the sense that most human beings will get there. It's when you are in a situation where you are triggered and there's that powerlessness that you're dealing with, that you have to learn to deal with the powerlessness. You have to learn to deal with the rejection. You have to learn to deal with everything. But there is an addictive property to those relationships because you don't get here. You're living in chronic apprehension, right? So you're not coming here. You're anticipatory of the other person's reaction if you've been with them for a while. So there's when people talk, oftentimes in domestic violence, there is a connection between fear and passion, right? That they tend, in other words, if I'm afraid of how you're going to be, we have an argument. I'm afraid now of loss. I'm afraid you're going to leave me. You're afraid I'm going to leave you. We get together, a lot of sexual tension, people have sex, they put that together. There's an association, like Pavlov's dog, with passion. And it's really about fear. And people breaking those relationships has to deal on multiple levels, though, with what you grew up believing about relationships. I mean, it's a whole cultural norm about what you're supposed to do in a relationship. There's a gender component to it. And so there are so many deep levels of why people stay in a relationship. And I haven't gotten to, sometimes I walk people through an abusive relationship, but I only have a minute, so I can't do that today. But there's a certain parallel with that, I think. Yes, somebody else?
I was just gonna say with the relationship and the cycle for a DV, it's the using the fear as the control, and that's where the relationship pattern I think is the biggest thing. Is it's the fear and the control for the relationship or the cycle to perpetuate itself, using the anger as power.
Well, one of the things though that I think is really important to pay attention to is that there are some folks, and it's a smaller number, who actually are motivated by the need to control. More people actually do things that wind up controlling the other person without the intention. So it's looking at the range of intention that becomes really important too, because the rhetoric around domestic violence is the power and control wheel and all that stuff. But there's a rhetoric around that that's so simplistic that I think, and it's labeling all these guys like that, and mostly there's a real range, and the smallest number are really motivated to say, I'm going to really mess with you. I'm going to do this. The intention, so many are unaware of their intention. It has the same effect, but making, some people aware of it is helpful. I want to thank you guys for your attention. Thank you.